Montana Territory, August 1885. The day burned dry and bright above the plains, the wind brushing over the tall grass like it knew secrets. Quentin Zane sat tall in the saddle, his dark hat pulled low, watching the distant ridge where the dust trail rose. His hand slid into his coat pocket, closing around the small velvet box he had carried for 10 years. 10 years, and he still had the ring. He had not thought she would ever come back. Not after the way she left. But there she was on the seat of a creaking stagecoach rolling toward the town of Elhorn Ridge. He would have known her anywhere. Auburn hair, pulled back neat despite the dust. Chin up, that same proud tilt of her head. Adelaide, he whispered, like the name might vanish if he said it too loud. The stagecoach pulled to a stop in front of the post office. She stepped down, boots hitting the dirt with purpose, skirts brushing her ankles. A boy and a girl followed behind her, both with dusty cheeks and wide, uncertain eyes. The girl clung to her hand. The boy stood stiff beside her, already trying to look older than he was. She had children. Quentin's heart thudded once, hard, then settled again. She had children, and she had come back. He swung off his horse, boots crunching dry earth as he crossed the road. She turned just as he reached her, and her eyes widened. Not in fear, not in surprise, but something softer. "Quentin," she said. He nodded, voice thick. "You came back." "I did." Her voice was quieter now. "This is Clara. She's 6. And this is Caleb. He's 9. Quentin looked down at the children. Clara stepped half behind her mother, but Caleb stared right at him, jaw set just like his mother's. "They their fathers?" he asked, voice low. Adelaide shook her head. "He died years ago. Fever. We were in Kansas then. I've been raising them on my own since." Quentin nodded slowly. "You need help unloading your things?" She looked at him for a long second, like she was trying to read a book she had once known by heart. Then she gave the smallest nod. They were quiet as he helped her unload 2 trunks and a carpet bag. The children stuck close to her as he led them down the dusty street toward the old boarding house. It had not changed much since she left, except the trim had been painted and the porch swing replaced. "You staying long?" he asked once they reached the porch. "That depends," she said, glancing at the children. "I need work. And a place for them. I heard Miss Waverly retired. I thought maybe the schoolhouse needed someone." "It does," Quentin said. "They're looking for a teacher." She looked at him again, and this time, he saw at the flicker of something old and unfinished between them. "I did not think you would still be here," she said. He shrugged. "I said I would wait." Adelaide's eyes dropped to the ground, her hand tightening around Clara's. "You waited 10 years?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. The corners were worn, the color faded, but he opened it slowly to show the ring nestled inside. "I never gave it to anyone else." Her breath caught. Caleb looked confused, but Clara tugged at her mother's skirt and whispered, "Is he nice?" Adelaide crouched to her daughter's level. "Yes, sweetheart. He is." Quentin watched her, heart heavy and full all at once. "I do not expect anything," he said quietly. "But I meant it back then. I still mean it now." Adelaide stood slowly. "Let me get them settled. Then maybe we can talk." He nodded, tipping his hat. "I will be around." She watched him go, her hand still around Clara's. Caleb stood next to her, quiet and thoughtful. "You know him from before?" he asked. "Yes," Adelaide said. "From a long time ago, before you were born." She did not say more, but her eyes followed Quentin until he was gone from sight. That night, Quentin stood on the edge of his porch, watching the stars come out. He held the ring box in his hand, turning it over once before slipping it back into his pocket. She was back, and that was enough for now. But he still had the ring, and he was not letting go of hope. By the 3rd morning, the children no longer clung so tight to Adelaide's sides. Clara had begun to hum while brushing dust from her shoes, and Caleb had asked if he could explore the creek behind the boarding house. She said yes, with the condition he take a stick and come back before supper. He nodded, solemn as a judge, and set off with his boots too big for quiet steps. Adelaide stood on the back porch with her sleeves rolled and her hair tied with a faded ribbon. The air carried the scent of sage and horses and a far-off hammering from the blacksmith shop. She watched the cottonwood branches sway gently, remembering the sound of them from long ago, when she'd walked this same porch in younger shoes. Quentin came up the path just after noon, hat in his hand. He didn't call out. It wasn't his way. She noticed him when the screen door creaked. He stood still, waiting for her to decide what to do with him. "You have time to walk?" she asked. He nodded, stepping back to give her space to come down. She didn't say where they were headed, but her boots turned toward the pasture behind the general store, where the land opened wide and the wind moved without obstacle. He matched her pace without effort. They walked in silence for a stretch. The sun hung high, and the grass hissed softly in its heat. When they reached the edge of the pasture, where the fence gave way to open land, she leaned against a post and crossed her arms. "You still working cattle?" "I keep a small herd," he said. "2 hired hands help when it's needed. I do the rest myself." Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "You ever leave?" "No." He shifted his weight, watching her profile. "Didn't have a reason to." She didn't answer right away. "Then, Kansas was hard. I took in laundry. Sometimes mended shirts. Once taught letters to a boy whose father paid me in potatoes." He waited. She didn't look at him, but her voice steadied. "There were winters when I had to burn furniture to keep the stove fed. One time, a man offered to marry me just so I'd have a roof. I said no and spent the next year wishing I hadn't." She blinked at the line of distant trees. "Then I stopped wishing." He looked at her hands. Calloused. One nail torn. A faint scar ran across her left knuckle. "You came back." His voice was low. She nodded. "It wasn't for me at first. It was for them. But this place stayed in my bones." He studied the slope of her shoulders. "Not straight, but not bowed. Worn, but not broken. I still got the homestead," he said. "It's quiet. Solid walls. A good stove. You could come see it." Adelaide turned to him, and her eyes searched his face. Not for charm, not for promises, just the shape of him and what he might carry that hadn't changed. "I'd like that," she said. They walked back slower. Neither of them spoke, but the silence wasn't empty. It held the weight of things said and unsaid, and the space between them felt different now, not wide, but waiting. When they reached the boarding house porch, she paused on the step. "Caleb's cautious. He don't trust easy." Quentin nodded. "He don't need to." Her eyes softened. "Clara's got a tender heart. I won't forget that." She looked down at her hands, then back up. "You still have that ring?" He met her gaze. "I do." She gave a small nod and turned inside, leaving the door open behind her. Quentin stood a moment longer before stepping through. The old schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, its windows clouded with dust and corners filled with the scent of dry paper and time. Adelaide stood at the front, chalk in hand, while Clara sat on the back bench with her feet barely touching the floor. Caleb had wandered outside with permission, tasked with gathering kindling for the boarding house stove as the evenings cooled. Quentin leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her write the alphabet in a steady, sure hand. Her dress was simple blue calico faded from washings, but it suited her. She didn't glance up until she finished the final letter. "I've never taught more than 3 children at once," she said, setting down the chalk. "But I reckon I'll manage." "There's not many in town old enough to need lessons," Quentin replied. "But there's 2 families with little ones up by the mill. They've been waiting on someone like you." She nodded and dusted her palms against her skirt. "It'll do, then. You could have sent a letter," he said after a beat. "Years back. Told me you were alive, at least." Adelaide's shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn to face him. "There were days I meant to. Even sat down with paper once or twice. But I didn't know what I'd say. I was ashamed, Quentin. Not because I left. Because of what I came to after. I wouldn't have judged you. You wouldn't have had to. I did enough of it myself." He stepped inside, slow and quiet, the wood creaking beneath his boots. The air between them held something fragile but steady, like a bridge just beginning to bear weight. "There's a fair next week," he said. "Out at Chambers Hill. Folks bring their preserves and quilts, trade stories, eat too much. I was thinking I might take Clara and Caleb, if you'd let me." She finally turned, her eyes steady. "You do that. They might not be mine, but they matter to you." Clara looked up from her bench, listening without understanding everything, but catching the tone. Her shoes swung in rhythm beneath the seat. Adelaide brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Caleb's cautious with new places. He watches everything, like he's waiting for something to go wrong. I'll show him the horses first," Quentin said. "That usually softens a boy." She gave a small, slow nod. "I'll bake something to bring then." He looked around the room, taking in the worn desks and the threadbare flag pinned above the door. Place'll feel different with your voice in it. I'll make sure the stove's working before the cold sets in. And I'll need slate boards. I'll ask around. I've got 2 in the barn. You can have them. She tilted her head. Still hoarding old things, are you? Only the ones worth keeping, he said, watching her without flinching. Her cheeks colored faintly, but she didn't look away. You always had a way of saying things plain. I learned to stop wasting words. Maybe I should start doing the same, she said quietly. He didn't press her, just stepped back toward the door. I'll come by at dawn tomorrow. Bring the boards and a saddlebag of apples. Thought the kids might like M. Adelaide nodded once. We'll be here. He tipped his hat and walked out into the bright afternoon. Clara hopped down from the bench and came to her mother's side. Is he going to be here a lot? Adelaide crouched beside her. He might. Clara leaned into her without speaking, and Adelaide wrapped an arm around her small shoulders. Through the open door, she could see Quentin walking away, each step unhurried, like he knew he didn't have to rush anymore. The morning of the fair dawned cool and gold, with a hush in the cottonwoods and frost just beginning to silver the fence rails. Quentin hitched his wagon outside the boarding house, canvas stretched over the bows, a basket of apples resting beside the seat. He climbed down slow, boots quiet on the hard-packed earth. Adelaide opened the door before he knocked. Her hair was pinned up in a tighter coil than usual, and she wore a shawl the color of burnt oats. Clara stood beside her, wrapped in a knitted scarf, eyes still heavy with sleep. Caleb came last, tugging at a wool collar that didn't quite sit right on his lean frame. You're early, Adelaide said. He glanced at the light just starting to touch the rooftops. Wanted to beat the crowd. Roads will be softer with the frost still in M. She nodded without comment and stepped aside so the children could pass. Quentin helped Clara up into the wagon, then offered his hand to Caleb, who hesitated before accepting. Adelaide climbed in last, settling between the children. She didn't speak until they were past the edge of town, wheels creaking over the rutted road. Clara's never been to anything like this, she said. Neither has Caleb. There'll be fiddlers, Quentin said, and pie judging. Might be a fellow selling peppermint sticks, if he made it over the pass. Caleb leaned forward. Will there be horses? There'll be a whole row of M, saddled and groomed. One's a paint I helped train last year. You can meet her if you like. Caleb gave a short nod, then sat back, eyes fixed on the horizon. Quentin caught Adelaide watching the boy with that quiet, measuring look she used when she was weighing more than words. They reached Chambers Hill before the sun had fully cleared the trees. Tents dotted the field, canvas snapping in the breeze. Smoke curled from cook fires, and the scent of frying batter hung warm in the air. Quentin pulled the wagon around the edge, tying off the reins near a patch of scrub oak. Caleb jumped down on his own. Clara waited for Adelaide's hand. Quentin offered his arm, but she shook her head, stepping down without help. They moved through the fair slow, the children darting ahead now and then, only to return when something loud or unfamiliar caught them. Adelaide kept her pace even, her eyes scanning the crowd not with fear, but with that guarded caution she wore like habit. They've kept to themselves a long time, she said as they watched the children inspect a jar of pickled beets. I didn't realize how much until now. You gave them steadiness, Quentin said. That counts for more than most things. She gave a small tilt of her head, but said nothing. Instead, she wandered toward a booth where a woman was selling knitted gloves and worn books. Quentin followed, hands in his coat pockets. The woman behind the table was the preacher's wife, round-faced and soft-voiced. You back for good, Miss Adelaide? She asked. Adelaide's fingers paused on a green wool mitten. I'm teaching again. I suppose that's close enough. The woman smiled, but not unkindly. We could use more folk with sense around here. They moved on after that, past the quilting tent and the barrels of cider. Quentin bought Clara a peppermint stick and gave Caleb a carved whistle shaped like a bird. The boy turned it over in his hands, lips pressing together like he didn't know how to say thank you, so he didn't. Later, they sat beneath a cottonwood, paper plates balanced on their knees. Adelaide picked apart a slice of molasses pie, watching Clara skip in circles beyond the tree shadow. She still dreams about rivers, she said after a while. She's never seen one, not really. Just the muddy creeks near the edge of town. But she says she remembers them. Quentin chewed slowly, then set his plate aside. Maybe she's just got a memory for things she never had. Some folks do. Adelaide looked at him, and this time, there was no hesitation in her gaze. I used to dream about coming back here, she said. Only in the dreams, you weren't waiting. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't need to. I never stopped waiting, he said. She took a breath, her fingers curling around the edge of the plate. I didn't expect you to be the same. I'm not, he said. But what I felt that didn't change. She held his eyes a moment longer, then looked away, not out of discomfort, but because Clara had called her name and was waiting, arms wide, for her mother to come see the painted pony tethered near the hay bales. Adelaide stood. We'll talk more later. He watched her go, the afternoon sun catching the edge of her shawl. Caleb stayed beside him, quiet as always, but a little closer than before. Quentin handed him the last apple from the basket, and the boy took it without a word. The fair went on, music rising over the hills. But for Quentin, the sound that stayed with him was her voice, steady and close, saying they'd talk again. And that meant more than anything. The snow came early that year, drifting soft and silent through the last days of October. By the time November settled in, the valley lay hushed beneath a pale quilt, and the schoolhouse windows wore frost like lace. Adelaide lit the stove each morning before light touched the sky, her breath showing in the air as she set out slates and straightened benches. Caleb and Clara walked with her now, their boots crunching the packed snow, their voices low but more certain than they'd ever been in Kansas. Quentin had taken to bringing firewood twice a week, stacking it just behind the schoolhouse door without knocking. The first time she found it, she'd stood staring at the neat pile, then walked out into the cold where he waited with his hat in his hands. You could come inside, she'd said. I will, he'd answered, when you want me to. Now, weeks later, he sat by the stove while she taught the children their sums. He didn't say much, just carved small animals from spare pine in his coat pocket or helped Caleb cut kindling during the midday rest. Clara had taken to sitting beside him, watching his hands work, asking quiet questions he always answered plain. One afternoon, as the children packed their books and slipped into their coats, Adelaide lingered at the chalkboard, brushing off the day's figures with a soft cloth. Quentin stood, gathering his tools, his coat thrown over one shoulder. You got time to walk? She asked without looking at him. I do. They walked toward the riverbank, the snow crusted and uneven beneath their boots. The clouds hung low, but the wind had stilled, and the air was sharp and clean. She stopped beneath a twisted juniper tree, its limbs bare but strong. I sold my wedding band in Wichita, she said. Paid for a doctor when Clara took sick. She was burning up so bad I didn't think she'd make it through the night. He didn't interrupt. I never told anyone that, she added. Not even Caleb. He just thought I lost it. She reached into her coat pocket and drew out a small tin. But I kept this. She opened the lid. Inside lay a single button, bone white and cracked. It came off the first coat I ever mended for you. He took it from her hand and turned it over between his fingers. I remember the coat, he said. Had a tear along the cuff. You stitched it so straight I thought you'd used a machine. I didn't own one, she said. Still don't. He slipped the button into his coat pocket. I'll keep it. She glanced up at him then, her cheeks pink from the cold. I want to come home, Quentin. You're already here, he said, voice low. I mean with you. All of us. He didn't speak right away. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the velvet box. It looked smaller in his calloused hand, the fabric worn smooth at the corners. He opened it and held it out. You sure? She nodded. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had been waiting. She stepped into his arms, her cheeks settling against his chest, and they stood like that while the wind stirred the branches above them. By the first thaw in March, the house on Zane's land had 3 beds, shelves full of children's books, and a kitchen that always smelled of bread or stew. Adelaide's handwriting hung above the mantel. Caleb's idea. He'd practiced it until it was neat enough to frame. Clara had a corner of the garden marked with smooth stones, where she planted wildflowers from the edge of the field. Most afternoons, Quentin brought the horses in while Adelaide chopped greens by the stove. Caleb helped mend fence when needed, and Clara rode the gentle mare with her arms thrown wide, laughing into the wind. One evening, as the sky turned the color of river clay and the chickens settled quiet in their coop, Adelaide sat on the porch steps with her hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the last of the light slip through the trees. Quentin joined her, his shoulder brushing hers, both of them wrapped in the same wool blanket. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked. "I hoped," he said. She leaned into him, her eyes soft. "I think we could be happy. Not perfect, but steady." "I'll take steady," he said. "So long as it's with you." She smiled, then, the kind of smile that didn't need words to carry it. And when he kissed her, it wasn't rushed or fierce, it was quiet and full, the kind of kiss that settles in your bones and stays there. Inside, the children's laughter drifted down the hallway. Outside, the stars began to show, one by one, across the wide Montana sky. And in that house, on that land, with hands held and hearts steady, they built a life that was theirs, whole, hard-won, and deeply good.